Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. The field of sports dietetics has seen significant growth over the last 10 years, from having just less than 20 full-time sports dietitians in the late 2000s to now over 200 full-time working between collegiate and professional sports. But what is their role and how important are they to the performance staff? In this podcast, we speak with Joey Blake, Director of Sports Nutrition and Sports Dietitian for the Los Angeles Rams. We dive into his career path to the NFL, what he loves about his job and the challenges that come alongside of it, his day-to-day during the offseason and in-season, and what it was like to win the granddaddy of them all, the Super Bowl. Now, as a Saints fan, I had to ask him what he thought about that no call about my Saints in the 2019 championship game. You'll have to wait until the end to see what he says. We also like to thank our partners at Gatorade for sponsoring this podcast. Hey, Joey, it's so good to have you. Welcome to the All Me podcast. It's great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, man. Good seeing you. Glad to be on.
So I know we're going to talk about the incredible season you guys had, with the Rams and everything that you got, and your role. And that's really kind of the topic of today is the role of the sports dietitian in the NFL, right? So we want to learn. I know our listeners, we've not had any sports dietitians on our podcast, even with around 70 so episodes, we really haven't talked about what does the sports RD do, especially at the NFL level. But before we kind of get into that, let's talk about your career path, given when you wanted to become an RD. There's a lot of options in your field. So number one, at what point in your life do you say, I want to be a dietitian?
Man, that's a great question. And I don't think I really knew right away. I think I really had to figure it out as I went. I think I really got into nutrition kind of at a younger age. My mom did a great job of, helping my brother and I learn how to cook, or forcing us to learn how to cook at a young age. So I think you just kind of naturally, subconsciously take that stuff in. And once I got to high school, probably like my junior, senior year, started to get in it just personally, whether it's for aesthetic reasons or just wanted to feel a little bit better, trying to maximize what little athletic capacity I had at 16, 17 years old. And I think originally I really didn't think that I wanted to go into nutrition at all. I started out as a business/marketing major, had no clue, ended up coming back to community college, thought I wanted to go to law school for a few years. Then was majoring in nutrition just because I thought it was interesting. My grandfather always kind of told me major in something that you like to learn about, and then go get your graduate degree in what you want to do. So I was working at the U.S. Attorney's Office all through college, and this was peak post financial crisis in 2010. And basically had a couple attorneys say this isn't a great time to go to law school. Maybe you should pursue this nutrition thing. And that ultimately led me to my first internship experience at IMG Academy down in Bradenton. And that was kind of the launching point for me. It was 2011. So it was the summer of the last NFL lockout. So got a ton of exposure to really high, level athletes who were kind of stuck and trying to figure out hey, what am I going to do if we do or don't have a season? I need to be trying to maximize. So got a really, really cool experience there just around football. Which was really neat for me at the time. And I think that was kind of the point where I'm okay, I'm going to take a swing at this. Although at the time, as you well know, there was probably about 20, 25 people doing sports nutrition full time back then. So I thought it was a great idea to go down this path with no jobs. So it eventually worked itself out, and I found myself to where I'm at.
Excellent. No, it's good to hear. And it probably when I first walked into my first nutrition class, it was 98 girls and 3 guys. And I was is this even the right place? But I'm this is the nature of our industry, is we are the minority.
Yeah, it's probably one of the few things where we're still kind of a minority. And I would say that probably helped me with my internship as well. My dietetic internship was people probably needed some males to meet their quota. So I signed up for that.
So there's a lot of options in our field of nutrition and dietetics. You can work in hospitals and food service and in this, that, and the other thing. But what resonated you to work in sports? Like, I know I was just like, hospital, there's just no way. I got to do something else in a hospital. But what made you go, I really would love to work in athletics or work with a team?
Yeah, I think I just grew up always around sports, and you said it, that team feel. And I think anybody who's ever been around sports for a particularly long period of time, there's something innate and powerful about being in a team setting. And I think it ultimately boils down to this, like every industry, whether it's technology, finance, anything that you try to get into, like they all try to emulate a team. And why is that? It's because a team has one goal, and that's it. All they want to do is win, and they want to win a championship, and that's it. And there's something so powerful about that everyone tries to emulate, but no other real field is like that. Like, sure, guys all have their personal goals, but like if you're a part of the right one, all those things kind of come at the team's expense. So I think just there was always just this part of me that always wanted to be a part of the group, like something bigger than myself, and using nutrition to help be a part of that. Like, I'm not a good enough athlete to do that myself. And I don't know if I'm smart enough to do it at a higher level as far as a front office perspective or a coaching perspective, but I'm really passionate about nutrition and helping people and having that service mindset. And I think that just ultimately drove me to find my path within sports to, help people be their best.
Yeah, you're right. Being part of a team and being part of that collective process, there's something really rewarding about that you can play a role and have a pretty significant impact on the outcome. Now, let's dive into really your first opportunity as a sports dietitian. When did you have that first opportunity to really get your hands-on experience working in sports nutrition?
Yeah, I had my internship at IMG, and then a part of my dietetic internship I did at the University of Virginia with their sports nutrition department. And then that really led to my first full-time internship at the University of Tennessee. And I was so fortunate to, have Allison Maurer to kind of mentor me, who was, so instrumental in building this industry. And along the way, and she's still someone that I reach out to with counsel, and she's been so good to me along the way and taught me so much. And honestly, was one of the first people that was critical of me as well, and trying to build me up, critical in a sense of truly trying to make me better. And always appreciated that about her. And was working with 10 different sports at the University of Tennessee, including football. Was obviously helping Allison with that. But it really kind of gave me that first experience to hey, there's a lot more to this than just telling people what to eat. That's always the first thing that people want to say. Oh, you just tell athletes what to eat all day. Yes and no. You're managing budgets, and you're figuring out how people think and understanding routines and figuring out how coaches think and what they want without them telling you what they want. And it's a lot more people-driven business than the clinical or food service side, for sure, of nutrition. And so I definitely was not a good dietitian. I was just lucky to learn from somebody who was.
My daughter says, "Dad, I hate your job as a dietitian." And when people hear that, they think, golly, does this guy feed his daughter food? It's no. Or does he let her eat things like ice cream? I'm yeah, it's normal stuff. We just don't tell people what to eat, right? We're not the food police. And I know we're going to dive into that shortly, but yeah, it's good to hear all the expanded roles, and kind of let's really talk about that. Millions of Americans have really no clue what a full-time sports dietitian does. They don't even realize you're on the sidelines, and who's that guy? What does he do? Right? They're just too busy watching the game, and that's okay. We're behind the scenes. So what are some of the responsibilities of an NFL sports dietitian? What's your day-to-day look like in regards to the things that you're managing?
Yeah, I think it's a couple different facets, and we can start with food service, and there definitely is an aspect of managing that. Clearly, a big part of my job is making things available for guys and having resources for them, which is food, right? So overseeing the menu development, recipe development, all those types of things to make sure, to your point, hey, we have pancakes, we do have French toast, we do have different things, but hey, can we make pancakes and French toast just a little bit better, right? Can we make it a little bit better choice for the guys? Like, that's ultimately what we try to do. And that's our biggest education point along food service is like, hey, you can have all these things, just make it a little bit better choice each time you do it. So I think being able to provide that safe haven for guys when they come into the facility, and understanding that for the most part, they can eat pretty much anything in there and feel good about it. And then the next part is, kind of administrative, right? That's overseeing the budget, and having an understanding that like, hey, I do have a boss and there isn't an unlimited spend, and it's being conscious of the food supply and all these things that COVID has taught us, the supply chain and all those things. You'd be surprised if you run out of individual bags of sweet and salty popcorn. It's a big problem. So how do you figure out how to source those things? But yeah, then it's obviously like, hey, you're managing the people with the catering department, and that's a whole other level of administration, right? You're dealing with personalities, and people have problems with other people, and how you manage those things, or someone calls in sick and you've got to manage that, or manage the people that do manage that. So there's a lot that goes into that. And then there's call it the performance piece, and that is where you get into counseling, and you have an understanding of how your athletes are eating, and what their goals are, and having an understanding there. But I think, getting in the weeds of all that, like, hey, you're evaluating supplements. That's a big part of my job. Guys are sending me stuff, making sure that things are third-party tested, NSF certified for sport, and that aren't going to put them, in a position where they don't want to be in. People are well-intentioned and they want our guys to be successful, but a lot of times they don't know what is harmful for them. So that's a big part of my job, is being that filter. And then it's like, hey, I'm evaluating their protocols. I'm doing pre and post, training and practice nutrition, post-game nutrition. Then there's the travel component of food service with that. And then hydration protocols, fueling protocols on game day. I could probably sit here and just rattle off all the little minuscule things that I do. But as you see, like, it's really all encompassing, and it's whatever they need. And then even from things from like some sleep counseling. And, I think that's the biggest thing that we often overlook from a performance side, is that, these guys deteriorate their body pretty consistently, day in, day out, week in, week out. And in what good sleep can do, especially for high level athletes who probably recover at a very high level, and just the little things that they can do from a sleep standpoint to maximize that recovery time, call it passive recovery, if you will. So it runs the gauntlet. And then sometimes you're just an outlet for them to come sit down in your office and tell you about a crappy meeting that they had, or, a night out that they had. So you just try to be that outlet for everybody for whatever they need.
So did you ever realize when doing your internship, did you ever say, I'm never going to use some of this stuff? Like, I used to say, I'm never going to need food service. Why am I doing this rotation? And then you come back to a job like this, and you're like, I'm using everything.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's so funny. I was talking to someone last week and they brought up Krebs cycle. And I was like, you know what? I probably haven't thought about that in a few years. But outside of that, although you really do, but you don't, from a metabolism standpoint. But no, it's exactly right. As you're going through, like, you really are touching the whole human being, and not just nutrition sometimes, because a lot of times their nutrition habits are affected by things that are going on outside of the athlete, right? Like, it's things that are going on at home, or, hey, eating a certain way because you're stressed or not stressed. So I think all those things kind of factor in, and yeah, we probably utilize a lot more than we realize we do.
With any job, I think people probably look at an NFL job and think it's cush, it's great, it's easy. They make a ton of money and they got all this unlimited money to spend, right? But with any job, you have challenges. Let's talk about the challenges of a full-time sports RD in the NFL. What are things that you find are challenging for you?
Personally, I think my biggest challenge is being able to step away. I think that's something that I'm continuing to get better at. And, I tell people I only know how to do this job one way, and I don't know if it's sustainable. Maybe not to the level of some of our coaches who really grind it out for many months out of the year and for longer hours than I do. But I think being able to compartmentalize work in my personal life is a big challenge. Especially with what phones and COVID created, where you're constantly available and doing those things. And I want to be able to be that resource for our players and coaches and staff. But at some point, I struggle with when I do and don't answer something. The other part is like look, a big portion of nutrition is housed outside of our facility and that we don't get to see, right? Like, hey, athletes are real people, and they do eat and drink outside of my sight lines. So it's having an understanding of that and truly being able to evaluate why guys can or can't make changes to best help them. And it goes back to building that trust and letting them know, like, hey, the more honest you are with me, the more I can help you. And then it's depending on where you are, like, hey, we do travel a lot. So being understanding of that. And then like, hey, your roster is probably going to turn over 30% every year. So you got to understand that you're always dealing with new athletes and it's never going to be the same. Right. So you're constantly kind of learning new people and new habits. But overall, like I would say those are the biggest challenges, other than if you can get over the early mornings and the travel. I think other than that, it's overwhelmingly positive.
So off-season workouts are starting, and I've seen some teams already getting into those workouts, and also OTAs are coming up. Let's kind of talk about just what's the goal now for you? What are you trying to do right now, whether it's with returning athletes, new athletes, et cetera?
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think really where I am is not to be cute here, but I think I'm to supplement what we're trying to accomplish: athletic training and strength conditioning, right? Hey, we're trying to acclimate from a tissue standpoint, and we're trying to build blocks in the weight room. So it's, hey, we need to make sure that we're fueling adequately. We need to make sure we're recovering adequately, make sure that we're continuing to build towards like what we want to accomplish when we're able to get on the grass during OTAs, right? Yeah, we do have the guys that are trying to make some changes and, might be slight position changes or things that they need to improve their body. And we'll definitely one-off those and do some counseling and try to make those adjustments. But from an overall global standpoint, these call it 2 months are really geared around like, hey, we're kind of building up to make sure that we're able to maximize everything we're doing from a football standpoint, come, late May, early June.
So let's kind of transition to the season. You're going to go through OTAs, off season, comeback camp starts. How does that role change a little bit now that guys have built up, their bodies are where they need to be, and now it's like, boom, what's the focus once the season starts and throughout the season?
Yeah, I think once you get back to training camp, it almost reverts back to, kind of your off-season program a little bit. Like, hey, guys have probably been on vacation a little bit before they come to training camp. So I always say like those first kind of call it 2 weeks are kind of that, reintroducing the tissue prep, the football side of things. Hey, we're getting guys maybe a little bit back into that football cardiovascular shape. Our director of performance has a great saying is that there's a difference in being in shape and being prepared for football. So those first 2 weeks, I think, are really preparing guys for football from a cardiovascular conditioning standpoint. And we're able to kind of make sure that we're doing everything recovery wise leading in. And then, yeah, once training camp hits and like once we get into our normal workflow, like really the biggest thing is like I'm trying to establish guys from a healthy routine. Like, are your habits daily like putting you in a good routine to make sure that you can perform your best? Like the biggest thing with nutrition in and around peak performance times is I never want you to have to overcome an obstacle in order to perform your best. Like you should step out there pretty consistently, feeling pretty good, feeling like you're ready to go, feeling hydrated, feeling fueled, to where like just go play football now. You should never be like, man, I'm really dehydrated going into practice. That's something we can prevent from happening. That's a controllable. Like, hey, let's if things are going to go wrong, let's make sure that those are outside of our control, right? So do all those things really well. And I think for the most part, things will take care of themselves. And yeah, as we get closer to the season, again, we kind of get in that weekly rhythm, right? Those last 2 weeks of training camp, post that last preseason game, you're kind of in a Monday schedule, then a Tuesday schedule, then a Wednesday schedule. So it's like, hey, guys, breakfast on Wednesday, eat this, snack here, lunch post walkthrough. Like, hey, how'd you feel going into practice? Did you feel really like, hey, yeah, you know what? I feel like I ate a little bit too much. Hey, perfect. Let's pull you back and let's do a little bit liquid carb route. Let's make sure we're doing that. So it's really just getting in that routine and then just continuing to build on that as the season goes.
Yeah, I love how you said habits. That's such an important thing because I see too many people focused on magic foods and eat this and don't eat that. And it's like, man, don't demonize things. It's not good or bad. Just focus on helping these guys because they're still young. And as you know, some of them are still learning about this stuff.
No
right?
question.
They don't come from a collegiate program or they didn't have access to someone like yourself, a full-time sports dietitian, it's almost like you're teaching a high school student how to eat again.
For sure.
With every job you have challenges, but there's also things you love. So what is it that you enjoy most about your work as a full-time NFL sports dietitian?
I joke with people in our building that I don't know if I would be able to do anything else because I'd probably get fired within a couple hours with all the things that are talked about on a daily basis. But no, I think it's exactly that. I think there's so much to be said about I'm so grateful that it has nothing to do with guys being athletes. It has nothing to do with people making a lot of money and kind of hearing cool things. I get to just be around 100 really good people that I have such an appreciation for their level of work ethic. I talk about all the time, like if I walk through our coaches' offices or I walk through our locker room in the morning and there's guys in there, like that motivates me. When I see people like really going, like trying to be 1% better and doing those things and really like going the extra mile, like that motivates me to do that. And I'm just so beneficial that I feel like I'm better as a professional than I was 5 years ago by being around other really elite professionals. I feel like osmosis has just kind of ran its course a little bit. I'm just so grateful that I get to see that stuff. Like I get to watch Sean up there and his leadership skills. I have a great boss in Reggie Scott that I can learn so much from just watching them lead and develop people that I'm so grateful for that. So that's the biggest thing. The second thing is that I'm probably one of the few people in the workforce that actually gets to apply their passion to their job for the better, right? Like I'm so passionate about nutrition. I'm so passionate about helping people, and those things go hand in hand for my job. I'm so fortunate for that. I try not to take that for granted. I'm sure there are moments where I do, but I really try to take a step back pretty regularly and understand that this is a cool thing. And then to piggyback on that, I think we get to this point where you've been in so many games and you've had so many Saturdays and Sundays in really cool places, and you take for granted game day itself, and how cool it is to be either at a college game day or NFL game day and be a part of that. How many people would be, would give a toe for sure to be able to be in the locker room and be around that experience, not even say anything, but just be around that experience. There was definitely a moment in the NFC Championship game against the Niners this past year. And I definitely wouldn't have had this perspective had we honestly not lost the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. And we were losing. It honestly wasn't really looking great for us at the time. And I just went up to two of our athletic trainers and I put my arm around them. And it was kind of like a big drive for our defense. And it was like third down. And I just said, hey, just take a second and just look around. How awesome is this? And you just can't take that for granted for what we do. We work too long. We work too hard without being able to actually enjoy the actual cool part of our job.
Yeah, that's awesome. You can soak it up. And because, one day it goes by so fast and you're like, man, I wish I would have done this a little differently. I wish I would. Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And we'll get to the end outcome in a little bit. Let's talk about now diving into the nutrition specifics of what you do. How often do you work with athletes on an individual basis do you customize a nutrition plan specifically for their needs?
Yeah, I think it happens pretty regularly and more so probably in the off season, right? To me, this is my time where guys want to experiment with different things, like different foods, different ways of eating, trying to fine tune. And then, like I said, once we get to that training camp season standpoint, that's where we're just refining those habits. So this off season is where we kind of want to counsel, get in the weeds and create those habits. And a lot of times it is something like you said, you just have no baseline for a guy. And it depends where he went to school. And to your point, his exposure with a dietitian, and also understanding, if he did go to a school with a dietitian, it might only been one person working with 30 sports. You're really kind of starting from scratch and you never assume. So it could just be something where typical answer is hey, you get a guy that's, hey, I'm not hungry in the morning at all. And it's okay, well, perfect. Hey, let's start with the liquid route. How can we go here? We want to create this habit of kind of getting nutrients in your body early on, and let's build on that. So it can start that small. Some guys have a ton of exposure, right? They went to a great college program with great sports RDs maybe they went to a training facility with a great sport RD. So they have a really good understanding of carbohydrate intake, protein intake, fat intake. And now you're really optimizing their plan, right? It's like, hey, here's our timing here. Here's what we want to do. Hey, let's space this out. I think this is great. Let's move this around. Or like, hey, you're optimizing from a supplement side. Hey, what little things can we add to, create some blood flow here, to maximize our strength here. So you can do some really cool things depending on the education level. But the overall big picture is like, it's like a pyramid, right? Like supplements is like up here in the pyramid, very small. And then like, hey, your core meals are down here. Like, let's focus on breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And let's start there. So, but yeah, it ranges, right? Like some of our guys want specific calorie needs and overall macronutrient content. Some guys want like, hey, can you just lay out like the types of foods I need at each time? And then some guys just want like, hey, like I just need some help here. So it ranges, right? And I think you're just always there to be that resource for, and you have to be willing to meet athletes where they are. You have to be understanding that just because you know a lot about nutrition and it's important, that doesn't mean they do. I think the biggest thing I spoke at a coach's clinic recently, and I had a coach afterwards come up to me when I used the word grace. And I think you got to have some grace for people who, even if they tell you they want to do things and then they don't do it, your level of how you handle that situation is oftentimes what is how they interpret the next encounter, right? Like if you meet them with like, hey, like what, I don't understand, like they're probably not going to do it the next time either, because you just kind of created a negative interaction with that experience. So it's like, hey, you know what? How can I communicate this better? Hey, we're going to do this better next time. We'll get this tomorrow. Hey, I'll come in. Do I need to remind you? That's totally on me if I didn't. And I think you just have to take ownership of that and have an understanding that, we all know how long it takes to create a habit. So being able to kind of have that grace for people and understand that it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah, you mentioned guys are all over. You got some that need this, some that need that. Do you have just like some athletes that are just, they love talking nutrition. They're picking your brain. They're, hey, I found this great product, or, I saw this documentary, right? I'm sure you have some of those in the locker room.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, like it ranges from, the guys who are 12-year vets to rookies, and, you have just different interest level. And like, I mean, we have a couple of guys that are exercise science majors from college, so they have like a deep understanding of that and are fully invested in nutrition. But then you have people who are watching, Liver King videos and are sending you those and asking your opinion on it. And, we all know where that stuff goes. And some of them are joking and some of them are serious. So those are always fun. But no, I think, yeah, it's really cool to see how it's changed in the past 10 years, right? Of like really people being able to get that exposure to nutrition, good or bad, but like having that level of exposure that creates these conversations that oftentimes leads to a habit or leads to a change or a conversation. And how many times like a guy's come up to me asking me about something and all of a sudden someone overhears it, and then now they're in the conversation and now you're kind of affecting two people instead of one person. Or the really cool thing is when you have another athlete explaining to the other athlete why they should do something, that's always a really cool moment. So being able to create those encounters is like a really cool thing.
So how do the when we look at calorie needs of some of these athletes, obviously you have offense, defensive linemen, the three plus, you got a quarterback, you got a receiver. How do the calorie and nutrition needs differ from those position players?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an inexact science, right? I think what we have to do is take into account their workloads. So that starts with, hey, what type of day is it? Do they have a weight training session? Do they have a walkthrough? Do they have practice? What's that look like? And then the biggest thing, I think, how you can measure it is the time, right? If you don't have a heart monitor, you don't have some things to like truly get that internal load. You kind of just have to go back to, the tools that you got in school, right? And do some estimations and figure out like, hey, what is this going to look like? And then also like the age of your person. Hey, the requirement of a 24-year-old wide receiver on your team, his workload demand is very different than a 33-year-old tackle on your team. So it's really kind of getting in the weeds of all those things. And I think our sports science team does a great job of kind of getting that on-field workload to me and having an understanding. So we have a good idea of like what the guy's weekly workload is going to look like. So I think on the front end, we're able to have an understanding of like, hey, this is going to be a heavy volume day from practice. So like, hey, let's compensate a little on the front end and the back end. But then having an understanding of, hey, that energy balance, depending on if it's a weight maintenance guy and maybe he's a little dinged up, not going to practice that week, having an understanding of pulling him back, but also making sure that we're not getting into a deficit to do anything detrimental. It's always a balance of those things. But I think at the end of the day, like, I think you just have to have an understanding of that athlete and understand that, hey, a 160-pound person has to feel a little differently than a 330-pound person. So once you have a broad understanding of that and what their overall day and week looks like, I think you can kind of put a plan of attack together.
So I'm an LSU grad, so I had to single out. You had a few LSU guys on the team, but one stood out in big Andrew Whitworth, right? Here's a guy that played 16, 17 years as an offensive lineman. That's a feat you don't see. Quarterbacks can last, they're not getting hit. But a guy like that, obviously, that's not an easy feat by any means. So what does it take? How important is nutrition when you look at an athlete that has that long of a career to help his recovery, to ensure that obviously you can't prevent injuries? They're going to happen. But how important is the role of nutrition for someone like that, just to get on that field for 17, 18, 20 weeks, throughout a season and still maintain a high level of performance?
Yeah, I think one of the things that outside of the human being that Andrew is, because that's a totally different conversation and a whole other level than, the performance side and the wellness standpoint. But I think one of the things that I really admire about him is his willingness to grow and be vulnerable. I think seeking knowledge from people that he has an understanding of that he's not the expert in. He's got a great team of people in different avenues. He reaches out to our training staff, reaches out to our strength staff, reaches out to me. I will definitely say over the past 5 years, he consistently asked me more questions than anybody else on our team. And I think that is what enables him to do that. And, I think you talked to him about the 24-year-old version of himself. It was very different than the 35-year-old version that I met. But I think somewhere along the way, he created this chip on his shoulder and started doing all these things and noticed how those things felt even before it was cool. Right. And so I really appreciate his level of wanting to seek that knowledge from people. And honestly, I also respect the willingness of to question you. I think that's what comes with being in the game. As long as he was he would question what you were doing and not from a standpoint of hey, I think this is not right, but hey, why are we doing this? And then just saying hey, if you are secure in yourself and had a process about going about it and can explain it, he'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I think having that, that professionalism and that ability to have that conversation was really cool to see. So I think nobody attacked, his well-being and dedication to nutrition and wellness more than Big Whit.
Yeah, it's good to be challenged as a professional, right? Because it keeps you on your toes, keeps you fresh. And there's those smart, intelligent guys that are, it's all right, I got to know my stuff, right? Because if not, I lose trust instantly with some of these athletes.
For sure.
Now, when we look at someone like that, a role model like Andrew, and our younger listeners that are listening right now going, wow, this is cool. How do they do that? How much, and when we look at some of these younger kids, they might not be putting value in nutrition. Where would you rank nutrition when you look at the performance circle, where you got strength conditioning, sleep, sports med, athletic training, data? In your mind, even being biased, where does nutrition fit into this piece? How important is it if you had to put it on a scale of 1 to 5 or all these performance pieces?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm going to be objective as I can here. I'm probably going to say 4 out of 5. I think for me, weight room, training room, overall health, that stuff's probably 1, 2. I love sleep, man. I think guys can, if they get good sleep, it can help you overcome a lot. And then I would lump nutrition kind of in number 4, and not saying there's a big gap between any of those or anything like that. But I think, look, we've all seen guys are really high functioning and elite level athletes, genetically superior that let's be honest, they can overcome not eating well. And I think we have to be realistic to that. And I think, one of the first things I tell our rookies is to raise their hands of like anybody who's ever eaten crappy and went and performed well, right? And everybody raises their hands. So I'm like, look, I'm not here to change your life. I'm here to be a resource for you. And I'm here to tell you like, hey, by doing these things, is this going to make you a better football player? No. But what it can do is it can enable you to train a little bit longer, a little bit harder. Can you increase your threshold? Can you feel a little bit better a little sooner? Instead of like, hey, it's Thursday afternoon and I'm starting to feel right. Hey, maybe Wednesday night you're starting to feel a little bit better. So Thursday morning you can attack your rehab a little bit harder. Or maybe you have an extra lift on Thursday that you can attack better because you're feeling a little bit better. And then like, hey, is the way you're eating affect how you're sleeping? And it's amazing how all these things kind of intertwine together. And I think before you know it, I think you realize that nutrition is high functioning. It is that resource that can help enable all those things to be better. But I do think it supplements, all of those other things, as much as that pains me to say.
Yeah. Once they see this stuff works, they're like, okay, I bought in.
No question.
Now it's like that guy can play 20 years. Brady's now 44. He's still playing. It's like, oh, maybe there is some science behind this. So let's talk a little bit about systems, right? You've obviously done a great job putting systems in place for your players to understand how to improve eating habits. But what do you do? Are there specific systems in place to ensure athletes are eating certain types of foods for recovery or energy or improving the healing process? Like for example, is there a color coding system on foods? How do you help athletes improve food quality?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And we've messed around here with the stoplight system and done some things like that in the past. And I think what we've done a really good job of with our chefs and catering department is I think we've kind of gotten everything to a point where kind of like I mentioned earlier on, if a guy comes in there and he's eating something, it's of good quality. And I think how I spin it to the guys is like, hey, we try to create this safe haven while guys are at work and while guys are training to like, hey, if there's something available, like it's of good quality. If you're trying to get a healthy fat, it's available. If you're trying to get a good quality carbohydrate, it's available. If you're trying to get a good protein source, it's available. We try to have all those things to make it very easy, right? I'm the type of person where if I buy something that I would say is not what I need to be eating, I'm going to eat it if it's in my house. So I think what we're able to create there is this ability for guys to kind of be free thinking while they're there and focus their time on training, focusing on football, focusing on film study, make it really easy for them. So I think that's kind of where we've gotten overall with our food service and that system that's in place. I think that's part of the thing is I think as we've kind of gotten here and I'm 5 years into the program, we do have this way of going about it where I have a relationship with people. Like part of my job is having that understanding and educating them. Like I feel like I'm kind of at the point where I don't need that system anymore, that my relationship with them is the system. We do use an app with Notemeal that kind of, goes through food service and does that. So like they do have a broad understanding of the macronutrient content that they're getting and can kind of track what they're doing. We can edit all that information in on the back end. And so we can have that working relationship there. So that kind of gives a good indication. So we're kind of backdooring it, if you will, a little bit, but overall, I think it goes back to that relationship that you got to have with your players.
Absolutely. No, that's great to learn more about just how are you changing behavior, but most importantly, helping them understand the quality. Oh, I get a lot of questions, athletic trainers, parents, it's always that pregame meal stuff, right? So number one, how involved are you with the pregame meal process? Because that could be a pretty critical component, I would think, for an athlete to ensure they're fueled well, but also are there specific do's and don'ts like with those pregame meals?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely on the forefront of that at all meals and making sure that I'm available based on how a guy's feeling and doing all that. Yeah, I mean, look, whether it's the night before, day of, like we all know the emphasis that we need to put on carbohydrates and making sure that we have that fuel readily available. But it's also like, hey, we don't live in a vacuum. And what we can't do is just assume that, hey, every guy's going to be able to walk in 4 hours before the game and feel great, fill up his plate with food and eat the perfect meal. Like, it doesn't work that way. I was not a good athlete and I couldn't eat anything before a game. So, and I struggled and looking back. So I think I just have this like really this soft spot on my heart for guys who are that kind of have that anxiety stomach or like hey, and it's people always just assume it's like the wide receivers and DBs that want to go out on the field, like light on their feet. Sure, we have some of those too, but it is not always the case. So it's having an understanding of like how a guy wants to feel. And then we do have the guys like not based on position that want to like, hey, I want to go out there and I want to be borderline sick. I'm so full. Like it is this broad spectrum of like really funny, like really unique things that you just have to have an understanding of and making sure like, hey, I can meet your needs doing all ranges of that. Whether it's a liquid route, like, hey, whether we're doing things, maybe it's not 4 hours before, maybe it's 6 hours before, let's get this in earlier. Everybody has a unique fueling strategy, and it's my job to help them figure out what that is. And I want to be able to be that resource. And what we want to do is alleviate any of that anxiety going into game day so they can go to the stadium. It's 30 minutes before the game. We're topping off hydration. We're doing all that. We're getting that last bit of fueling strategy, and they can go out and play football. That's ultimately what it's about. Like, does it happen that we're working on guys halfway through the game sometimes and, we're keeping them in it? Sure. But that's never what we want to do. Like, we never want that. We want guys to go through no issues, feel great. That's the ultimate goal. No missed time. So yeah, pregame meal can be an adventure sometimes.
Yeah, no stress and all those things, nerves. They think, oh, just because they make money, they're not nervous. It's just fun, right? It's a job. No, it's a lot of anxiety. I just remember when I played high school football, I, try to go to the bathroom before the game just to make sure I don't have to go during the game. For football, I would be the first one in, the last one out. I was just so nervous in anticipation. It just makes those things stressful. You talked a little about using technology. I know that's just a massive part of what sports performance is about, whether it's nutrition, strength and conditioning, injury data management. There's a lot of things right now that are tools and resources that professionals like yourself are using. What type of technology that you use? I think you mentioned oatmeal, things to track eating habits, body composition, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's where things have gotten, and there's a lot of really great tools out there. Yeah, we utilize an oatmeal for our food service and then some of our performance metric stuff in and around nutrition. We get a lot of great value in and around that. I think it makes it really easy for guys for me to input their macronutrient needs, input the calorie information from the menu items, and as guys select it, it fills it up, and having an understanding of like, oh, I need more carbohydrates. Here's the carbohydrate items, and go from there. I think it's a very functional system for us. It works great. And then, body composition testing, that's a hand in hand. And I think how we utilize body composition testing is it's a trend over time. Based on someone's feeling, how they're performing, is their body composition lining up with that? Is it consistent? We want to make sure we're steering them in a direction to be successful. A lot of times body composition comes more into play for some of the guys who aren't playing week to week, that they can struggle with kind of that body maintenance in and out of the season. Especially I think some of your linemen who are traveling but not getting a lot of run on Sundays. I think those are always kind of the guys you're in a body maintenance phase, which is always actually fascinating for me to go through because it's hard because you're one play away. And you always, so like your process and fueling doesn't change, but I might get more work than you do on Sunday. So it's this really fascinating kind of energy balance for those guys that are kind of traveling non-play, but at any point they can be inserted in the game. So those are always fascinating as we go along. But then we have so many weight room metrics and return to play metrics that we're able to utilize to make sure that, like, hey, if we have a guy return to play and he's doing force dex metrics, hey, are we making sure we're, maximizing recovery for that particular athlete who's coming back? And kind of understanding like, hey, we know we have 4 weeks between these two jumps. Here's the phase that we're in. We're in a strength phase in the weight room. Hey, here's the things we're emphasizing. So it's really cool to kind of see how those things measure up as time goes on. It's not always a linear transactional kind of occurrence, but all those things come into play as far as our process goes in and around those things.
Do you look at, just random question that came to mind, so sorry if it's a little different, but do you look at any biomarkers or anything from a nutritional standpoint that you say, hey, look, vitamin D, this or that, anything that you look at to assess that athlete as you're heading into the season? Yeah,
definitely. I think vitamin D is a big one for us. I mean, it's really kind of the one that is a precursor to so many things. And then we're big on the foot and ankle, and, we have big, powerful athletes that put a lot of pressure on that foot, specifically the outside part of the foot. So anything we can do to make sure, like, hey, if we do have a guy that's low, putting them on the appropriate protocol to make sure that we're getting them back to a healthy level, I think is key. We messed around with some food sensitivity testing for a little bit. To be honest, we really didn't get much out of it. I just think the testing's not quite there yet, with it being kind of efficient enough for what we're trying to do, especially from a global implementation side. It's a little difficult in this setting. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like, hey, anytime we're doing lab work on guys, we're kind of assessing the total person and approaching it from there.
So last really nutrition question, and we'll kind of talk about some exciting things. Dietary supplements, right? You mentioned a little bit about that earlier. We know that's could be a big part in some of these athletes' protocol when we look at performance. Do you recommend any specific types of supplements of general health, strength, recovery?
Yeah, and there's not many. I think from what we know of, like, honestly, research backed, like, tried and true things, like, there's like 4 or 5 things that, like, overall, we really want to put our name behind and recommend, and that's not always for everybody, but I think the big thing, and not in the sense that I think people typically use it, but I think creatine is just overall, like, brain health, overall health. Like, it is in everything now. Like, it's in everything from facial creams to you name it, it's in there, and it has research back to say that it works. It's really got such a bad rap in the 90s. And I think we're finally getting to a point where we're overcoming some of, one wrongfully accused research article. But yeah, that's a big one. And I think our guys have really started to, get to a point where they feel comfortable with that, and we utilize it. And then, like, hey, don't overlook just a whey protein supplement or plant-based protein supplement, and what that can do for your recovery and the efficiency of your protein timing and everything else that we know about MPS post-workout and things like that. That's a great tool for us. And then, nitrate supplementation from a Beat Elite side, I think we're able to get good buy-in with that. I think guys really feel that over time. And there's a couple more things, but I think overall, like, that's a pretty good summary. And I think, like I mentioned before, I mean, a big part of my job is being able to be this filter and making sure that, guys aren't doing anything from a detriment. Again, I think it most of the time comes from a good place. It's not malicious when people recommend things to athletes, but they just don't know. And it's unfortunately a field that's not particularly well regulated. As we all know. So just trying to be that resource for guys and have them understand what they're taking.
Yeah, you talked about that. And that was really my last question around nutrition and supplements was, with the amount of supplements on the market, and many of them not third-party tested by like an NSF, how do you ensure they don't go outside those circles and, my trainer gave me this, or somebody gave me this and said, it's the next best thing since sliced bread? Do they always come to you and the sports med team to make sure before they put something in their body?
Yeah, that definitely falls on me. And sometimes they do go to sports med, but it usually gets referred back to me. And we're making sure that for the most part, they are taking an NSF certified product. And then if not, it's informed choice or some sort of, reputable third party. But I think, honestly, it has happened to me at the Rams where we have had a guy had a positive test, and it's something as simple as like, hey, my buddy was a personal trainer and he gave me this product and I took it and didn't look, and that's how it happens. That's how easy it can happen. And unfortunately for our athletes, it costs them a lot of money when those things happen, and you feel sick over it. And you feel responsible, but I think it's the education on the front end to letting them know, like, I am here for you. And I am here to help you. Let me help you. I know some things can seem very harmless, but it's not always the case. So, I think we do overall a pretty good job with making sure those checks and balances are there.
Last year, you won the Super Bowl. It's like, wow. It's like, this is, everything you got into pro sports, right? For that specific reason. What an accomplishment. So number one, congrats on that. What was that feeling like for you?
I don't think I'm still able to articulate that into words. Again, I think don't tell Ted Harper, but I think I'm grateful in a way that we lost the first time. I think it really makes you understand and truly process, like, what a moment that is and how awesome it was for our players and coaches to achieve that, and 56 teams have been able to do that, and you were a part of it. And for me, like, just to be able to say that I may have had an impact on just one person on our team is just still just really cool. Literally today we were having a medical meeting and someone had like a panorama picture of the Super Bowl up above their desk. And I just am not paying attention to 2 minutes of this meeting. And I'm looking up and it's like, remember when we won the Super Bowl? Like, does anybody remember that? I'm saying this to myself, of course, but like, you just still have those moments that it's awesome. And I'm just so proud that I got to do it with such an awesome group of people. I know that sounds cliche, but I'm just so grateful that I really do like the people that I work with. And I mean that I'm so benefited from just being around awesome people, because it's very rare to have that. And I can't think of honestly one person in our building that I like don't like interacting with. So we're really fortunate to have a lot of good groups, or a lot of good group of people.
Yeah, no, that's the years, the constant year grind, and you get to that end point. You're like, man, it's all worth it, right? You've already been to that point, and you lost and you failed. And it's not a failure, but it's like you get all the way there, and you're like, golly, you get a taste back. How do I get back to that, right? So where do you want to be in 10 to 15 years? Where's Joey Blake going to be in 10 to 15 years with your career?
Man, that is a brutal question. I think for me, I don't know what that looks like. I love nutrition. I love football. I love sports, and I love sports nutrition. It may be in that. It may be in something else. I think the biggest thing for me is I would just want to be able to continue to grow as a professional and grow as a person. And wherever that takes me, it takes me. If that's working at the postal office because it led me to that and I'm helping people maximize, great. If that's working with the Los Angeles Rams and sports nutrition and helping athletes continue to get better, I'd love that too. But I'm open to anything, and I think it just boils down to being able to continue to grow and have that growth mindset.
That's awesome. Well, Joey, we're not done yet, but we're done the nutrition part. But we have this little round called the Curveball round. I have one question I can't wait to ask you, but 3 questions, right? Nothing to do with our topic, just something fun. And I always ask this question. I start with this because I'm a music junkie, so I love music. So if you could be the lead singer in any band today or in the past, who would that be?
Oh man, that is a tough question. Lead singer of a band. You know what? People are gonna assassinate me for this answer, but like I gotta say, like Backstreet Boys in the late 90s, like I feel like that's like on par with people just kill me of being like LA and sunglasses and like, hey, why don't I be just like running next to, Justin Timberlake back then. And, we're just living our best life, and, LFO 98 Degrees, any of those, put me in there and I'll just fit right in and, sing along.
There you go. All right. If you had one nutrition superpower, what would it be?
Oh, in what reference?
I guess to impact health, like one maybe nutrition superpower that could really change the landscape of total health, nothing performance related. I know, random. Man. I've never asked anyone this before, so I thought it would be good for you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the context of the question. Like, I'm a food, or I'm doing something.
You're doing, like, if you had the ability to do something with food that could change the outcome of health, it could be like maybe curing this or improving.
Oh yeah, I'll keep on par with what I've been saying. If I could help people come up with something that would help them sleep, I would definitely do that. If there was something nutritionally that would really be able to help people get 6 to 8 hours of good sleep every night, that no question I would do that.
I tell you, I've been drinking my tart cherry juice before bed. My 11-year-old loves it. It boosts my little melatonin. I find I sleep a little better when I consume it.
Yeah.
I just need to do it more regularly. All right, last question. I can't wait to ask this. 2019. There was this no call at the Rams.
I was waiting for this.
Was that a penalty?
Well,
that was just a. I was like, I gotta ask him.
So here's what I'll say. There was no penalty called on the play, so therefore it was not a penalty. But in the words of my guy, Nikhil Roby Coleman, I put that man in a Waffle House skillet. So I pancaked him, however you want to term it. That's my guy, Nikhil Roby. So yeah, retrospectively, it was probably worthy of a flag.
Yeah, you could probably. I mean, now it doesn't matter 3-4 years later, right?
Yeah.
You know, some of our fans down here are still kind of like, oh, you know, if let it go, it didn't happen, whatever. But I just had to ask. I was like, no doubt,
as you should.
Joey, it's been an absolute honor to have you. It's great to see you and catch up. Thank you so much for being on the All Me podcast. This was fantastic. A lot of incredible value that our listeners are going to truly enjoy.
Awesome, man. Again, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.